Something we've had to do on almost every combine we've owned is get the rear concave adjustment freed up. Right now it's ran all the way down, and this just helps when you have the tires off and you're doing your general service, not to overlook this. I love it when I can get a bolt to do that. Took a lot of WD-40, but and then I had to run to get the concave itself actually free. I had to run it up and down probably 5 or 10 times and put a lot of oil right in here, and actually shot it in from the front as well on both sides. Just helps to get the pummy and stuff that's been sitting in there, and then you washed it and got it nice and soggy, so then it turns into glue. And then this side we actually got so free that I didn't run this nut up to push the cylinder down. It actually just fell with loosening this top nut. It actually just fell all the way to the bottom. That's what you want, because when the tire's on here, you're laying under there and it's not fun. You're skinning your knuckles, it's hot and normally dirty. Another thing to keep in mind when you're adjusting your rear concave, this happened on the 540 as well. If somebody just keeps cramming on this nut trying to pull the concave up or push it down, you start to pull this little S bracket off the wall. This one you can tell the other side looks really good, but it has all this paint chipped off, and it's sitting at a slight angle. You might not be able to tell that from the camera, but you don't want to be just careening on that all day long. You want it to be nice and easy. That's why we want to do it with the tire off. Our final drives are all sealed up except for this gasket. I'm going to have oil delivered tomorrow. And this one's sealed up. This one was in great shape. Both of our seals went on good. Put a nice thin layer of grease right here like the book talked about, and we're ready to fill them with oil tomorrow. It's about 5:10, and I did get our rear beater Poly V installed. That was kind of a challenge without taking the idler off, but I cranked it all the way over until it was actually hitting over here, and cranked it actually just a hair further, and then I was able to push the belt on. Saved me just a hair bit of time, and I've got torque wrench and sockets on order to fit that 2.5-inch nut, and I'm supposed to torque that up to 300 foot-pounds. We'll see how that goes. Alright, our heat shrinking worked beautifully. The bearing went in perfectly. Not a lot of prying. I had like a 24-inch pry bar on it, and it was gentle for that, so that's perfect. Had just the right amount of torque, and got it to spin in, and now I'm going to reattach it to that. Going to refill the final drives. I picked this oil up. We actually have like a 35-gallon drum of this, but my guys in the shop threw away my jug with this little nozzle on the top of it, so I grabbed this from CarQuest this morning, and I'll use that, and then I've got another gallon or so around over on the other bench. This is a 5/8 of an inch drain plug, and the same as here, and then you fill your oil until it runs out of here, and then your final drive's filled, and fingers crossed they shouldn't leak. Both final drives are filled. Each one of them, from completely empty, took 2 quarts of oil. I took the slip clutch that was welded together apart with just a hard wheel on my rigid grinder, and I don't know why that it was slipping. They just probably didn't have the proper spring tension. This has to be compressed so far, and to look at both of them, there's not a lot of difference other than this one just has original casting marks. I mean, it has good teeth, it meshes well, The only thing I can figure is somebody was trying to get done. Since I have the parts already, I'm going to go ahead and change it, but I'll save this one on the shelf, make sure it's labeled properly so that I know what it is when I need it, and if I ever need it, I'll have it up in the parts loft. Okay, we're going to do the return auger slip clutch, and our first piece to install is this locking collar for the thrust bearing. Our Loctite has set up overnight, and now we're going to start on installing this according to the manual. In the manual it talks about installing these brass bushings. I don't have a press out here at Charlie's, so what I did was use a flat backed socket and a vise, and I pressed one in. I started with the opposite side actually, because it has all these serrations, and it talks about putting them flush with this face on both sides. I used a flat back socket and a vise, and since they're just a copper and brass bushing, they're pretty malleable, and that just pressed them right in. But you want to of course make sure that you start straight. And now that those are in, slides right on the shaft. Oh, the spring was in the way. Slides right on the shaft. Perfect. Okay, we've got our slip clutch all reassembled, and about halfway through doing this, I remembered that I hadn't ever checked our horn alarm in case this ever stops spinning. This is supposed to snap back and forth when this slips and hit a switch back there, and then you pull a lever, and in the cab it turns the horn back off after you've shut the combine down. So me being the donkey that I am, didn't check that, and I've been working the better part of the afternoon on trying to get our horn system to work. So what I opted to do was bypass the switch entirely and go straight to the wiring, which this would be positive and negative, or vice versa, whichever way they run. And I got our battery charger here. Might be a little bit jerry-rigged, but this is the only way and the fastest way I know to check to make sure you've got good connectivity through all of your lines, running all up and under the saddle tank here, all the way out to the horn, which is dismounted, and for a reason. That's the horn mounting bracket, and I made sure that I had good ground, and our light is running. If I go pull this wire right here, light shuts off. Okay, found our horn just sitting there, and this horn was actually turned upwards like this, and so all while I was washing it, and probably most of its life, it was collecting bean tummy for us. Dust and anything else, grease and oil. It's a greasy old thing in there. Don't know how well you can see it. I tried digging around in it with a piece of bale wire. Finally messed with it for 20 or 30 minutes and actually got it to sound, but it's very weak. And I called the auto parts store, and they have a called a highway blaster or freeway blaster for $21. Supposed to be very loud, and they had a high tone and low tone for $19.95, I think, something like that. So since all of our wiring is good, I've never had a switch be bad on me. Won't be the end of the world if it is. I've got the 550 for parts. Since our wiring is good, the wiring was in excellent shape on this combine. I probably won't have any troubles, but we will check in on it more tomorrow. Another form of cheap maintenance we like to do, anything with an O-ring style connection like this. This O-ring has been pressed against for 40-50 years, and they get dry, brittle. Sometimes they're missing entirely. If a farmer took it apart and didn't know it was supposed to go back on there. My camera's not focusing very well, This has a flat edge where obviously a O-ring is rounded. Doesn't cost very much, especially if you have an O-ring assortment sitting around. This is the main return from the hydraulic oil pump, and we're going to put this O-ring on and then reinstall it. This was leaking quite noticeably when we first started washing the combine, and we found it actually was just loose. Just turned it by hand, but a new O-ring goes a long way on something like this. Looking in on the motor compartment, we changed the oil some time ago, September 9th. The oil drain line here, I just stuffed back in here so it wasn't hitting me in the head while I was doing the cylinder bar change. There's quite a puddle of oil underneath of it, and it appears that this little brass or aluminum gasket here is either shot or damaged, could be cracked. I didn't inspect it very well when I put it back together. I have Kuhn's Equipment pricing a new line all the way back to there. However, I don't know how easy that would be to get tight in that kind of confined space, and obviously you can't get a socket on it. So I am also just pricing the gasket. Something simple I like to do in the way of cheap maintenance on a repair like this that is in a tight confined space is change my bolts out. Factory originally, these came with a flat-headed pan head 1/4 inch bolt, and you have to remove this tank band to change the straw walker belt right here. And they had that in a confined space. A small flat-headed screwdriver wouldn't even fit in there. I had to use a bit on a needle nose vice grip to hold the back side and then turn it off with a 7/16 ratcheting wrench. And that's just a pain in the neck all the time. And so what I like to do is change out the bolts. For one, you get new threads that you know you can just twist on by hand, and you can also hold the back side. I went to the local auto parts store and got these hoses made. They had all the fittings, which is always nice. Some of these hoses weren't really in too bad a shape. This one wasn't too bad, looked fairly new, but it had this joint in it. Not saying it would leak, but I did get into it pretty heavy duty with the power washer by accident there. I could have made a weak spot. Not a big deal, but you're there and you're replacing hoses, so why not? You eliminate one joint. And then all of these are originals. They've got red paint in some of the cracks, and when you bend them, they make creaking sounds. Like this one has brakes in it. Not say it could last a long time, but why take the chance when that can slow you down for a day, especially if you're cutting on a weekend. Everybody's gone home. Just simple maintenance. We want to try to prevent any problems. A simple thing to do when you're especially replacing this many hoses with multiple fittings that fit each other is every line you take off, you mark where it was. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory. I'm doing this the same day that I took it apart, but that just eliminates confusion later on down the line. Got the new horn installed with the new mounting bracket. Taped it up nice to ensure that no nasty dust or water gets in there. Probably wouldn't hurt it, but we want to take every step we can to avoid problems. Used a 3-way switch on this, and that allowed me to not only use this alarm system, but if I go up into the cab This was on the corn diesel. I thought it was a neat feature. It only costed probably $15. With my 3-way switch, I have a horn now.